مساء الخير.
Good evening. I would like to welcome you to the final session of the fourth round of the annual Palestine Forum, which is entitled The Future of the Palestinian National Project, where the four speakers are going to try to diagnose the current situation and to try to foresee this future. We'd like to give the floor to Leila Farsakh, who is a political science professor from Massachusetts University, who is an expert in political science. She has authored many books, including Palestinian Migration into Israel and Rethinking the Palestinian State, and also the separation, division, and also she has authored many other books. Dr. Leila is going to present her paper and goes to talk about the future of the Palestinian national movement beyond the Palestinian state project. The floor is yours.
مسموع؟ هلا. مرحبا.
Thank you very much for the fourth round of this very important forum, because this is an opportunity for us to meet all from our diaspora in order to find a solution to the deadlock in which we are. So I'm going to focus on the Palestinian national movement. So how can we talk about the Palestinian state project, to talk about the traits of this Palestinian project in the aftermath of this genocide. So we are at a turning point, which is very important indeed, due to what we have faced in 1948 as a result of the displacement of Palestinians. So the genocide of the Palestinian people, the genocide on the people in Gaza, it has led us to 1948 and not 1967. This turning point that has been imposed on us due to the war. So this entails that we have to go beyond the project that was announced and the acceptance of the two-state solution, and to accept a Palestinian state in Gaza and the West Bank. So the latest war on Gaza makes it once again clear that it is impossible to have a Palestinian state irrespective of the recognition of 157 countries, including France and the UK. And this is something that was underlined by the Trump plan to exclude the Palestinians and the PA. And so this paves the way to a new Oslo agreement, which is Oslo number 3, to be implemented on the Gaza Strip, where it gives the military the power to control a great deal of the territories and also to create areas that are separated from each other, as it is the case of the West Bank. So we talk about the impediments that stand before the implementation of this project, but after the latest war on Gaza and the Palestinian people, the project of the Palestinians leans on overcoming the two-state solution, and also to talk about the meaning of this matter after this project. In order to talk about this liberation project that is required, it is incumbent on us to explain why do we hold tight to this project, the Palestinian state project, and also to talk about alternatives. And the war on Gaza calls upon us to concentrate and focus on it. So why does the Palestinian leadership and all the political parties and the large number of the Palestinians, why do they want to have this project? There are two answers. We have what is called political realism. So many talk about the consensus, the two-state solution, and the power of Israel, and the difference of the balance of power. This makes this option in the West Bank and Gaza the only realistic solution that can protect some of the rights of the Palestinians, if not all. And for those pragmatics, this matter is not to put an end to the two-state solution, but how can we force the Israelis to commit to this project? And also from the implementation of international laws, diplomacy, in regional pressure, and also through the implementation of Trump's plan. And the main objective is to get financial gains to the friends of Trump and only the friends of Trump. So it is also necessary to take into account the economic and political dimension, as I did in my latest book. The continuation of this project is linked to the financial and economic interests in which it was invested, not only at the Palestinian level, but also regionally and globally. The Palestinian state is based on capitalists and owners of capital, and the continuation of this project lies and leans on these capitals that are part and parcel of the Abrahamic Accords that were concluded in 2020. And they push forward the interests that were set by Trump, which is based on neoliberal kind of thinking that can lead to an economic peace that would try to rebuild what came after the war. And it is a reconstruction that would benefit people who are close to Trump. In my view, there is another reason why many want this project to continue, because it protects our right and also to have a peace process that started by denying our right, as it was the case with the Security Council Resolution 242 after the 67 war. That was the main or cornerstone for each and every agreement that was concluded ever since. So the Palestinians do not remember any of their rights. They are considered as refugees that need a humanitarian solution without mentioning any UN resolutions relevant to the Palestinian situation. So the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people, they stick to this kind of solution because they focus on their rights as per international law and self-determination. So that is why international law entails that each people have the right to preserve and enjoy their rights. So this project played a very important role in consolidating the Palestinian presence within an international system that plays a role in the protection of the rights of the people and individuals. But the role of such international law has come to an end for three reasons. So this project was based on division and was limited to an understanding of sovereignty, which is based on imperial structures that do not focus on accountability and justice. There was an attempt to establish a Palestinian state based on an expanded Zionist structure. So they have accepted this project as a realistic one that cannot be faced through military resistance, because this is going to constitute a kind of a criminal response. And this had led to more division and splintering of the Palestinians, which led to the marginalization of the Palestinian cause and make it void deprived of its main principles, such as freedom and the right of return. So the international system has lost its laws and legitimacy, as it was unable to stop the genocide on Gaza and to protect the Palestinians. And we have seen countries such as the US and Russia, who have ignored the concept of sovereignty that was established for 8 decades, as we have seen through the abduction of Trump, of the president of Venezuela, and so on and so forth. So what is the alternative for the Palestinian project, which has a very important historical role, a role that showed that there is a Palestinian state, but it did not lead to liberation. We're talking about a Zionist country that tries to marginalize the Palestinian cause and impose apartheid. In my view, the future of this project is linked to a new liberation project that is based on self-determination and goes beyond it in order to set a real liberation mechanism. In my view, this requires going back to the democratic perspective that was proposed by the PLO, taking into account the latest developments that have happened in the aftermath of the war on Gaza and the regional situation, which is much different than it was in 1948. So talking about one state in which the Palestinians and Israelis coexist after the genocide that was committed by Israel on Gaza and that has revealed the fascism of Israel is becoming something that is perhaps not possible to achieve. So this project perhaps is a necessity, or perhaps is more realistic than the two-state solution for many reasons. So the project of one state is more realistic because in actual fact there is only one state. One state, as many researchers have described it, and this was mentioned once again by Dr. Azmi, that this is a state in which the people live an apartheid situation because it is Israel that controls 7 million people who live in such territories. Second, all the discussions taking place about how to put an end to the conflict, they do not try to gauge how the situation is happening. So Trump's plan has reinforced the apartheid system instead of dismantling it. And also we have a leadership crisis in Palestine and also the failure of such leadership, including the PLO, in representing the Palestinian people. The genocide has confirmed the end of the national movement as we knew it, and it has put an end to the 1948 Nakba, and also the leadership that prevailed in the 30s that was led by Haj Amin Hassan. So they have lost their legitimacy, and this happened for a long time. As we have seen, of course, in the latest developments. So the situation in Palestine is no different than the situation that was in South Africa. So we do not know how the resistance is going to be in the future and how it is going to be represented and how it is going to be led. We're going to have a new generation as we had after the Nakba of 1948, and it took them 15 years until they came to the forefront. The realism and the justice of the one-state solution, it is going to be linked to the kind of constitution, and there have been many talks in the last 2 decades about the justice of the one-state solution and that it is the only one that can protect the rights of the Palestinians and to put an end to the Zionist occupation and colonialism. The Palestinians in the diaspora, they want to have a democratic state that would give the Jews of Palestine individual rights, and others, those who live inside Israel, they want to have both peoples living together. But both cases show that it is impossible to have such coexistence. And those who live inside Israel, they accept this second identity without having a kind of colonial role on the Palestinians. As we know, there is another proposal, which is a confederation, so that can build on the recognition of both the Palestinian and Israeli state, and also to take into account historic Palestine and to build on the previous decades, and also to change the asymmetrical structures such federation can guarantee the return of the Palestinians in keeping with Resolution 194 and accept the existence of the settlers without giving them any privileges. Many would say that this is not going to put an end to the colonial power of Israel, and it is not going to be accepted by Israel. So Israel is exercising its hegemony on the region through its multiple attacks on Syria and Lebanon without deterrence, but the balance of justice and force is uneven. So if there are any fluctuations, this would enable the Palestinians to have a democratic liberation project. Any liberation project would entail that we have to formulate the concept of ummah, so the nation state is unable to have citizens on equal footings, because this can lead to fascism, and it is not going to protect the rights of the Palestinians, as we have seen in the individual of the Palestinian Authority. We need to redraft the concept of the ummah through making it far from its racial pathway, and to talk about the state as a legal structure that can include more than one people, as long as this system is democratic and not a racial authoritarian regime. From an institutional and representational perspective, so the PLO should be reformulated, then how we're going to be dealing from now on with our political differences, social, ethnic, and economic differences. So political participation is not limited only to the Palestinians, because it is central at the regional level, and it has not been solved, as we see in Syria and Lebanon. So the constitutional proposal can lead to a constitution that we can have representational justice and democracy. This is a long pathway before us, particularly in light of the genocide that we live and the continuation of the division amongst the Palestinians and the regional role that tries to make the situation very difficult. So the fact that the Palestinians insisted on staying on their territories, and also the central value or importance of the case, and the fact that this cannot be completely removed as a case. So we need to protect the unity of the Palestinians, the territories, and also to liberate all those who live on historic Palestine from all forms of colonialism.
Thank you, Dr. Leila, for your intervention. And our next speaker is Dr. Hani AlMasri, the Director General of the Palestinian Center for Strategic Studies, Masarat. He is a political analyst and a writer who resides in Ramallah, focuses on policy analysis, democracy studies, has many articles and publications. Some were translated into English. He took part in the official reconciliation talks, and he was a member of the board for the Yasser Arafat Institute and He provides political analyses based on scientific evidence. He will be talking on the future of the Palestinian project. Good evening to you. I'll start with an observation, an intervention. I will give an obituary of the Palestinian National Project. This is very painful, not in this general sense of belonging to this cause, but at the personal level also, because I belong to the Palestinian National Movement for 50 odd years. So when I speak of it in terms of an obituary, it's very painful. I hope I'm not right. It is no exaggeration to say that the Palestinian National Movement and the Palestinian National case in general is going through a collapse, in fact. First, failure in liberating the land, failure in achieving independence, despite this many decades of the Nakba and many decades of the establishment of Fatah and Hamas, and also لأن both the official leadership, the resistance factions, the elites, all of them have reached a crisis, and now they are banking on the Trump plan, despite the fact that it is a plan aimed at imposing a colonial hegemony on Gaza and leaves alone the apartheid state, which is waiting eagerly to declare Israel's annexation of the West Bank. They treat the Palestinian as just a group, a population bloc, and the whole project as a real estate development, and all the Palestinian institutes are ignored, and this has been marketed under some illusions that there will be an era of prosperity awaiting us, and also the return of the PA to Gaza after some substantive reform, and also the de facto authority in Gaza. And in view of everyone who is rushing in to provide services to Trump and who announced the peace board and trying to establish Palestinian entities who have nothing to do with the long history of resistance. They treat the Palestinian cause as a humanitarian case without any mention of the self-determination right. The Palestinian cause is not a crisis that needs to be managed. It's a liberation, national liberation cause, and it represents the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Instead of tackling the root causes of this crisis, a new form of imperialism at the expense of liquidating the Palestinian cause from its roots. This will not lead to peace, but a series of explosions sooner or later. The Trump plan got legitimacy through a resolution that was passed through the Security Council without the Council being the reference point. They established the Peace council with a role that can be beyond Palestine and Gaza, and to be an alternative to the United Nations under the leadership of one person, a person with antagonistic attitude who wants to blame the Palestinian victim and not the Israeli perpetrators, and not to apportion any blame on the Israeli state because of the crimes they have committed and still committing now, and inviting the likes of Netanyahu and other enemies of the Palestinian state, and the whole council being under the veto of the American president. It's not, what I'm saying is not meant to mean the boycott of the Central Committee in Gaza, nor do I call for try to make its role a failure, but to support it in its humanitarian role, and to make every humanitarian aspect should be linked to legal and political dimensions. They want humanitarian aid to be the center point and focus, and to make this committee slavishly subjugated to the whims and desires of Trump, and focus all its work to the humanitarian aspect, and ultimately to be an alternative to Palestinian entities, deepening the divide between Gaza and the West Bank. A cartoon described it as a disaster in the making. The question remains, why have we got to this stage, and how can we come out of it? The Palestinian history confirms that new beginnings are always there, and after 100 years the Palestinian people used to rise from the ashes time and again. After the Nakba, the setback of the Six-Day War, then the invasion of Lebanon, then the Aqsa Intifada, and then the 7th of October, which was a reaction to the calamities which were forced on the Palestinian people, but it was a jump in the sky. The proper diagnosis is necessary to achieve prognosis. The true and correct diagnosis only can lead to cure, and this requires a revision of the Palestinian case, and not stop at blaming the outside elements and the enemies, because the internal elements bear a lot of responsibility. Why hasn't the Palestinian people achieved victory? And why haven't we benefited from the huge accomplishments? And why haven't we turned any achievement into a victory and a state on the liberated land, and into two authorities fighting each other, so much so that the faction became the priority? And why have we recognized Israel and the security cooperation in return for a vague recognition of the PLO? How can we bypass the impact of Oslo when the Palestinian Authority is under such unfair pressures? And how can we avoid the adventurous attitudes which lead to disaster? And how we should allow the Islamist or nationalist or pan-Arabist positions take precedent over national aspirations, and to why are we seesawing between making the leadership go in parallel lines which cannot meet and converge, and also sanctifying armed struggle first, then criminalizing it, then the opposite again. Resistance is not a small god with which we worship. Sacrifice is not an end in itself, it's a means to achieve our objectives. Why has the Arab and international and human aspects were set aside? Because without this, our cause cannot continue, and we banked on either enemies or increased our enemies instead of making friends. And why is it that only people who show loyalty to the leadership were brought to the forefront, not according to their capabilities? And why have we ignored proper elections? And we are not in a situation where we can expect any solutions, neither based on one state or two states. Israel has managed one state, but it's a one state which is an apartheid system, and we are in a period of steadfastness, but it should not be one of submission, but resistance, a resistance that should protect our people, our cause, our narrative, minimize our losses, and also resist the enemy's plans. The Zionist project, despite its surplus power, suffers from structural weaknesses, and their narrative has collapsed at the ethical level, and they still have half of the Palestinian people living in Israel. The old world order is collapsing, a new one is being born, and we see a period of transition with the return of empires where the strong will swallow up the weak. We must change the balance of power and not to deal with it as an academic or intellectual thing. This is a case of balance of power, a power struggle, and we should work to force Israel to give the minimum, at least, of the Palestinian rights. The Arabs have strong cards, and if they play them right, they can impose their will on the New World Order, and it's not guaranteed that Israel will maintain its historic position. They may have a power surplus now, but this will not be the case in the future. And Israel's behavior towards the region is testimony that one day it will lose this position. The continued division, this past genocide, issues a death certificate of the Palestinian National Project and cannot be explained except through placing narrow interests first. We must have a new national movement which keeps what is good in the old one with the addition of new elements, able to benefit from the opportunities now that both Fatah and Hamas have reached a crisis, a deep crisis, and take into account between those who resisted but then got into a bargaining situation, and those who resisted and didn't but did not achieve victory. So we really need a new context, otherwise we will risk a collapse, a total collapse. And this new thing will not be achieved through slogans and calls for coups, but to rebuild a new kind of thought which can be able to carry the banner forward. The expected scenarios, there is no prospects of negotiations in the foreseeable future and the achievement of any Palestinian rights. The Trump plan only provides protection for the Israeli plans, and this is the only game in town, and this reveals the desperate situation that the Palestinians find themselves in. It's a new form of colonialism which will bring no peace, but it entails annexation, colonialization, and either the current scenario would remain and persist, or it will disappear, giving way to a worse scenario which will not respond to the Palestinian rights even at a minimum. And it will be through the implementation of a new Oslo minus, or a new deal of the century minus. If the current balance of power continues, it will enhance the possibility of either continuing the current status quo scenario or bring forth a worse scenario. This depends on the results of the Israeli elections, and or otherwise we can have a Palestinian entity which is a state by name only. Maybe when a new Israeli government comes to power which is less extreme, then they try to get rid of the nuisance the Palestinian cause causes them and continue integrating Israel in the region. They may think that this Palestinian entity can fulfill the needs of some Arab countries like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the center of this entity will be in Gaza, and it will be linked to West Bank. It will issue passports and maybe contain some sort of a linkage with the PA, because the Israeli state wants to keep the land without its people, and maybe the people of Gaza will not only be Palestinians only. In Davos, Kushner spoke of 1 million Palestinians. The total is 1 million, so this means they are planning to expel 1 million. We run out of time. Maybe 1 minute for you to wrap up. 1 minute, please. Maybe we can continue during the P&A to declare a new political decisions by abolishing also and come up with a new plan linking resistance with new principles, the redeclaration of the PLO on a more representative basis until achieve wide popularity. Working from within the PLO is impossible There is no longer an institution there. There is now talk of re-engineering the PLO to only accept one line or one direction, and there are laws being prepared of barring anybody from elections, not at the level of the Legislative Council, but even at the municipal level. Also, to move the center of gravity to the international scene and to work to punish Israel legally and ethically, boycotting Israel. The Palestinian crisis is serious, and there is no other choices. Banking on the unknown and the unseen is not a solution. There is also the black swan scenario which can happen, and if it happens, and our area known that this scenario has seen the black swan scenario being fulfilled more than any other region in the world. So we have to awake to this. If we have the will, the awareness, there is history, and the history testifies that these people, whenever it comes, edges closer to the end, but it always comes back rising from the ashes. We hope this will lead to a deeper dialogue.
Thank you very much, and I would like to move to the third speaker, Dr. Ahmad Azam, who is an associate professor from Qatar University, who is specialized in political economy. He is a former professor at Bir Zayt University, has got his PhD from Edinburgh University. So he focuses on the Palestinian cause, and he was the editor-in-chief of a periodical on Palestine, and also Kamal Adwan, A Man and a Revolution in Amman, and many other books, member of the Central Council of the PLO. Thank you very much. Good evening to you all. I'm going to start by what was mentioned previously, and I'm not the first one to mention that when we have a direct threat that we are subjected to, as it is the case in Gaza and to lesser extent in other areas in Palestine, this can lead to a feeling amongst many that any talk about a national project, it is a kind of theorizing from a high pedestal. So that is why when we talk about the current situation, we need to talk about a national project. And if we do not do so, this is a situation that is going to perpetuate, and we're not going to be able to find a solution. So I'm going to talk about both the political and the social structures of the Palestinian movement. I'm not going to talk about international relations nor the Arab relations or the high politics or real politics of such conflict. I'd like to focus on the social and political dimensions and perhaps the psychological dimension as well. So I would like to talk about three main points. I would like to talk about the current situation first, and also I would like to talk about the situation in which we live. We are in a state of shock, as Dr. Leila mentioned, and when she mentioned to Naomi Klein, and I would like to talk about this prelude, which is the creed of shock. And here this leads me to another rule. At the end of each and every war, we have a process where we try to translate the outcomes of the war in a political perspective. So what we see in a new reality. So we would like to talk about the shock that comes in the aftermath of a war and reinforcing a new system. So we have what is called a conflict transformation and conflict management. And I'm going to talk at great length about what we mean by the transition of conflict. And the third point that was covered to some extent by many speakers prior to me was going to talk about many variables that we see in front of us. We have many variables such as the retreat of the ideology, the factions, and so on and so forth. So first, the state of shock in which we live. So Naomi Klein says if and based on other experiences from the intelligence services in the US, if an individual is electrocuted or subjected to an electric shock, that person would become helpless, unable to pay heed to what is happening around him or her. And as a result of that, the person perhaps would be in a situation that he or she would accept anything, similar to a tabula rasa, whereby a person accepts everything and anything. And this is a doctrine that was imposed on states as well. When there is a national disaster or a catastrophe, the people of those countries live in a state of shock whereby they accept so many things. And this explains the fact that certain leaders of the resistance have started welcoming the steps undertaken in Gaza, thanking Donald Trump for what he's done so far. And even some of them, they accept what was announced in Davos, consider it a form of resistance, and also it reflects also a feeling of being unable to reject and decline what is being proposed. So Hamas knew that there were many gaps, and they did bet that they're going to be able to change the equation to be able to benefit from these gaps through new negotiations. But there is a systematic Zionist and American attack. We have seen the beginning of some of its traits and episodes in Davos, and as the previous speakers have said, this is an imposition of a new kind of system, and it is very important to know that this is an attempt to build a new Palestinian community where there is no liberation movement or national project. When the Oslo Agreement was concluded, there were no projects, which is two-state solution and a political settlement, and to liberate Palestine from the sea to the river. What has happened, practically speaking, does not give room to any of those two components. From a settlement point perspective, political settlement, as it is now discussed from an American perspective and worldwide. So this is a destruction of all the things that the Palestinians bet on, including the internationalization of the Palestinian cause and leaning on international law. Now they talk about this peace council without entering into details. They did bet, and there was a lot of controversy among the Palestinian leaders and those supported that a legal solution working on kind of an armed strife perhaps should be the solution. But we have to recognize and say that all what has been said by the resistance prior of the 7th of October have come to the end, to unify the ranks, unifying the fronts, and also talking about the fragility of the Israeli military doctrine that cannot fight or wage a war on the ground. All of these slogans that the Palestinian project was, or resistant project was based, no longer exist. So we are facing a new project that comes with a new idea and a new concept. I would like to say that this does not mean that the situation is bleak 100%. We should not forget about the unprecedented solidarity that we have seen worldwide, and this has led to some fractures and frictions within the different groups, including the Democrats and Republicans. These are some things that should be underlined. And this is not something that I confirmed. I think that the European and Arab movement for the two-state solution was very important, and the peace conference that was hosted in both France and Saudi Arabia were one of the main reasons or direct reasons for a ceasefire. The resoluteness in Gaza, despite the dear price and the state of shock that I talked about, these are things that we should not forget. The second point that I would like to talk about is the transition and transformation of conflict, which is known scientifically and academically as a new way of dealing with conflicts. The most important component is that we do not deal with the conflict itself. You deal with the community of such conflict. You deal with the environment whereby you create a social, ideological, and economic transformation. This is what we mean by conflict transformation. This is what is happening to a large extent in Palestine. This strategy, which is a transformation of conflict from a theoretical perspective, would be a good prelude if it is practiced on both sides. But for it to be practiced only on one side, then here we have a process of gaining the conflict and not winning it. And the most important traits that we see, this is an attempt of domestication. So we have seen so many changes within the Palestinian community, the social and political structure of the Palestinian movement. And of course, we have the first component, which is depoliticization. And the most important slogan said that the revolution made refugees, made them freedom fighters, fighting for their needs. So they've become revolutionaries who can represent themselves by themselves. But what is happening now, practically speaking, is the contrary of this process altogether. So when it comes to transforming a prisoner into a revolutionary or freedom fighter, into a social phenomenon that is sent to the Ministry of Social Affairs or an institution that is under the umbrella of the Social Affairs Ministry. So this is contrary to what happened in the 60s and also change in curricula in the Palestinian territories. In Palestine, of course, we have to say that this is very important indeed. And of course, to cancel the refugee status of the Palestinians and to change the curricula in UNRWA, and also to have institutions, international institutions that support the Palestinians. They have their preconditions. So now a team, and I'm here talking about actual examples, they cannot put any song of the revolution. The European donors would come and would hold a club accountable if they try to put a song about the revolution. So the most important transformations that we have seen, this has led to a pivotal change when it comes to the different associations and unions who do not see a justification to have any of their work against the occupation for steadfastness as it used to happen in the crossings and so on and so forth. Now the demands are financial, material, to do with the livelihood of people, but perhaps this is seen as the result of a lack of a democratic mechanism where people participate in the decision-making processes. This is part and parcel of the depoliticization. And of course, we see great activities undertaken by Palestinian youth, and we see also activities within Palestine. But it is clear also that we lack a political framework. We do not have a kind of a general framework that Habermas talked about. We do not have a unified institution or media. So the first item is depoliticization in the transformation of the community, and also to have transformations in the political and social forces. So there is an escalation for these forces to substitute the previous factions. So the factions retreated for many reasons, which is the absence of the socialist camp, and also due to globalization. But practically speaking, when we see things on the ground, and here I'm going to give you two examples, when you look at the escalation, we have the strength or the force of the elders and the clans and tribes, and when there are countries that do not meet their own duties such as security and safety and the needs, these secondary identities would come to the surface. And here we have the clan and tribal identity that has come to the surface. But what is most important is to take care of this situation. So what is important is not what is being proposed by the Emirate of Hebron and the elders and leaders who meet in order to talk about an emirate. And this is not only limited to a militia that is armed in Gaza under the name of tribes and clans. And this is not new for in excess of 30 years since Oslo. So when we talk about American institutions and think tanks that call for modernity, that sponsor a number of training projects about sulh, talking about reconciliation or alternative laws. So this sponsorship of the family and the clan, and we should not forget the important role played by clans and tribes, but when they are used in such way, they are trying to come up with a new power. And the second power that is being escalated is the power of the private sector and businessmen. And of course, the majority of businessmen and many of the components of the private sector, these are national, patriotic, we do not doubt them, but there are processes and plans happening on the ground. Perhaps all of you have listened to the speech by Kushner in Davos, and those who listened to his speech would remember Naomi Klein and what happened in Iraq when Paul Bremer came to Iraq. The first decision he took were relevant to free trade, and Kushner in his presentation talked about de-radicalization and as one of the items, and after that he talked about having a mindset of private sector, so the mindset of private sector structures. Talking about the private sector, we're talking about a private sector linked to Israel completely and altogether. So let's look at this situation. So last year, or in the last 2 years, during the Gaza war, everybody suffered economically speaking. So the PA suffered a great deal. Normal citizens who had small businesses, and also we have looked at the different figures relevant to the last 5 years that show that some companies in the private sector have received assistance from American and European institutions of up to $1 billion. So these are part of the assistance given to those people. But there is a bank that got a loan in August 2024, $100 million for a number of international institutions. So there is a sponsorship for the private sector, and this reminds us of the idea that the Peace Council that has been announced from Davos. And as you know, Davos is a symbol of mixing between business and policy or politics, the closed rooms when people talk about projects that are announced to people. But in Davos, contrary to other fora, there are closed doors, or people meet behind closed doors to talk about business and ways as to which they can create economic changes. And also in Davos, they talk about linking between the private sector and the Palestinians and how successful it is. And this entails that we should study this matter at great length. The second point that I would like to talk about is internal reform and also illusional reform that we live. I'm not going to discuss the Arab position. This is not the topic of discussion today. And as I said a while ago, I think that the Arab and Islamic efforts and even the peace conference that was presided by both Saudi Arabia and France was positive. But in addition to this positive side, so it is said that the PA should undertake reforms, and these are precondition for what? I do not know why, for what. So that is why the Palestinian Authority believes that if it undertakes these reforms, it is going to make gains. So these gains are not, we're going to reach a final solution stage as we saw during the Clinton era. So the leaders of the different factions, all of them, they were asking what is the aim of all that. So when they talked about the position of a prime minister during the era of Yasser Arafat, any person who studied a constitutional regime, they would, our system, they know that there is a catastrophe. So we have a president and a vice president, and any student would understand that what happened was a big mistake. Not these are not reforms, and this is a kind of a scapegoat that would make people scared and concerned. So that is why they say if we do not get any aid and support, this is going to be to no avail. So talking about reforms, perhaps this is for an objective, for a wish perhaps that they have, that this is going to be part of a political process. So also there are talks about trying to find a solution to the crisis and manage the crisis. And this takes me back to the first point that I mentioned, which is how to manage the shock or the shock states. So we have a discourse where we have the absence of the factions and also so what are the outlets? What are the possibilities to exit this situation or this state of shock? So the most important methodology that we can use in order to overcome this shock is the preservation of identity and the preservation of history. We have a number of steps that we need to work on. We need to support resoluteness. This entails that we should work in order to overcome these difficulties. So, of course, solidarity among Palestinians is criminalized. You cannot transfer money easily. So we need a legal system not only to criminalize the acts committed by the Israelis, but also we need to have a strive against what the European institutions entail when they impose restrictions on funding the Palestinians in the realm of solidarity with the Palestinians. So that is why we need to cooperate with the different solidarity groups in order to bring to the surface a solidarity and also a liberation discourse, a discourse of strife, of liberation, a discourse of law and regaining the legitimacy, particularly when it comes to the prisoners of war. And also the third point, which is to return to play the very important role, which is the difficult components that should be always preserved. The representation of the Palestinians, which is the PA. So we see that they are sidelined. I think we need to underline the importance of the PLO, not through media campaigns only, but also to build frameworks. And here at the Arab Center, I was honored to talk about the Palestinian Confederation, and here I meet to have diversity amongst the different groups. So we have to rebuild the different unions, and these unions would carry out the job that does not exist in each and every country, but this should be part of a network and to speed up the process of going back to the PLO and the liberation movements. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad Azam. We have the fourth and last speaker, Dr. Tarek Hamoud, who is a researcher at the Arab Center for Research. He's got a PhD from Exeter in the UK and a master's in international relations from Kingston, and he is specialized in Hamas movement, and he's going to talk about Hamas after the day after. Thank you very much, Dr. Ayat. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity for the third year, and this reflects that the discussion is not only a particular one. So this is not only a particular topic when we talk about Hamas. This is relevant to all Palestinians. So that is why when we talked about the national project, this is very timely. And I would like to start with the central hypothesis to say that this has paved the way for a new arrangement, but at the same time, this has led to questions about the future, a future that comes closely to the war. What is the future of Hamas as a ruling power within Gaza? So this question also focuses on this unprecedented cost that has affected the infrastructure and the people. And also there are a number of constraints that is going to lead to so many complex repercussions. So Hamas is an idea, and this is not enough to talk about the future of Hamas. The future of Hamas is linked to institutions, political options that can be impacted with the lack of balance of power. So after the truce entered into power in October within the Gaza plan that was supported regionally and internationally, where they started talking about a ceasefire, and also the yellow line within Gaza, which was very controversial about its actual borders, although it was transformed to be part of the equation of the future.
Therefore, I suggest to deal with the question of Hamas's future in two parallel tracks. First, Hamas is an armed faction, and Hamas as a ruling authority in Gaza. First, Hamas as an armed resistance faction. This is an organization which, after a very deep war, a war of attrition, and calls now for the re-evaluation of the whole question of armed resistance. Now, the movement fought itself faced with a double test. How can it deal with its future as a resistance movement?
So in Gaza, we have had a number of impositions, including these group punishment, and also we have seen also what was represented by Al-Qassam in the face of this machinery, and through an opinion poll that was carried out after the truce, and that shows that there is a base of satisfaction, but which is not constant. We're talking about 66% in the West Bank and 51 in Gaza, and it can be described as relatively solid support base, yet it remains conditional upon the trajectories of the day after and the day after the day after, and upon what will unfold about the coming months. And here I would like to bring your attention to the fact that we need to be cautious and people tend to romanticize steadfastness and heroism, a tendency that Hamas has successfully reflected in public consciousness. However, from a historical comparative perspective, we have to know that caution is warranted against assuming that symbolic capital derived from steadfastness automatically translates into political gains unless institutional structures are emerging, and this would not lead to political opportunities if it does not include a real investment in this symbolic perspective. This is what has happened after the siege of Beirut. This sympathy alone does not generate political opportunities unless they are accompanied by genuine organizational reform, realistic positioning choices, and effective investment of symbolic capital. So there are three branched out challenges that talk about the fate of Hamas. The first one is the movement's capacity for internal restoration and reform. This determinant places the restructuring of the leadership at the core of the movement's future prospects. The assassination of the head of the political bureau, Ismail Haniyeh, followed by his successor, Yahya Sinwar, and earlier by the deputy leader, Sheikh Saleh Al-Aruri, produced a prolonged leadership vacuum, forcing the movement to manage its affairs through an interim leadership council. Although the movement's institutional structure theoretically provides mechanism for successions, the war and the accompanying human and organizational losses within the upper political and military echelons, particularly Gaza's leadership, has weakened the coherence of the center of decision-making, dispersing nodes of influence within the leadership. The war has compelled the movement to postpone internal elections, prolonging the interim administration and opening door to the public surfacing of internal disagreements in an unfamiliar manner. This delay exacerbates two core problems: ambiguity in leadership mandate, which in turn slows strategic decision making. That is why consolidating the movement's role, whether as a resistant faction or as a political actor, requires a calculated organizational restoration process. So resolving the issue of succession and electing a leader capable of reducing the costs of the leadership vacuum, redefining the relationship between Gaza, the West Bank, and the external leadership through the functional distribution of the roles that limit conflicting rhythms rather than the mere organizational power sharing, institutionalizing the military political decision-making process in a way that links the two spheres and reduces the internal dissonance. Finally, launching a comprehensive internal review aimed to define the realistic objectives for resistance in the horizon of the truce and its aftermath. Second, renewing popular legitimacy. Hamas's popular legitimacy constitutes the most decisive capital. At the same time, its principal source of vulnerability. Armed movements may adapt to siege, imbalances of power, and limited international recognition, but they cannot endure this long-standing situation if their reservoir of social acceptance begins to erode. The erosion of the social base weakens the capacity for recruitment and financing and ultimately undermines survival itself. Accordingly, previously mentioned public opinion indicators should be treated as a window for renewing legitimacy, but also as a conditional one. And here we note that the emergence of public trends within Gaza that hold Hamas responsible for outbreak of the war. Conversely, several reports have pointed at the movement's ability to recruit large numbers into the military wing during the war. However, neither of these phenomena should be treated as a conclusive evidence, and it is very important to look into this social debate, those who support, the opponents and the proponents, and this should be part and parcel of this base, and this recruitment happens through the traditional network. And also we need to bring to your attention that the fact that the collective punishment as an approach aimed at stripping armed movements of their social base may in some contexts produce counterproductive outcomes by reinforcing social cohesion around such groups rather than dismantling it, thereby transforming some sympathizers into combatants. This is one of the options that can transform the situation of sympathy into something else. That is why the discussion that is most feasible is linked to the inability of the movement to meet post-war recovery requirements rather than solely because of the suffering endured by its social base during war itself. From this perspective, renewing legitimacy within Gaza is conditional upon Hamas's ability to convert its capital of steadfastness into tangible gains in livelihood, security, public services, relief, and reconstruction, and also, by contrast, relying on high-intensity mobilization, including rhetoric and temporary spikes in opinion polls, is insufficient. So the third point is consolidating regional reliance in the post-war phase. The movement needs to preserve its regional relationships and channels. These networks, they do not present resources for negotiation, but this is also very important indeed when it comes to the role of the movement, and this component is linked to internal reform without a leadership that is in line with the support on the ground, and without a legitimate. This is not going to be of any use, and without a coherent and cohesive leadership, the restoration of these regional relationships become exceedingly difficult. And at the end, so this is not going to be an alternative to local legitimacy. It is going to be a sum of all of that. So in some, consolidated regional reliance does not constitute a substitute for internal legitimacy, and also failure would make this network a tool of pressure instead of reinforcing the movement. And as a result of that, Hamas's future as a resistance fraction hinges on organizational crossroads, reforming leadership and unifying decision-making, renewing legitimacy through tangible outcomes, and managing networks of regional and international reliance in a manner that preserves the movement's autonomy. The second axis is Hamas as a governing authority in Gaza. We examine Hamas's future as a governing authority from the standpoint that Gaza carries a complex institutional legacy, 27 years of direct Israeli military rule, followed by 13 years of Palestinian Authority governance, and then Hamas's rule since 2007, which means that Hamas's rules represents the longest period of Palestinian governance in Gaza. This historical sequence is essential for understanding the layered nature of administration, service provision, and security in the Strip, as well as the structural distortions produced by the years of siege. Israel has rejected most alternatives of post-Hamas governance, including any meaningful role for the Palestinian Authority, in line with the vision of the far right that opposes strengthening any Palestinian political entity. The absence of a clear Israeli answer to the question of the alternative has contributed to the instability in regional and international narratives regarding the administration of Gaza after the war, and to the obstruction of proposed arrangements due to Israeli rejection. And within this context, the project of a national committee for the administration of Gaza was accepted, and withdrawal doesn't mean that it is going to desert the scene as a whole. So the movement has many services that it was able to establish, and of course the movement retains entrenched influence through bureaucratic and service networks rooted since 2007, rendering any subsequent administration practically subject to a formula of conditional cooperation with Hamas, particularly the security domain. And there is a technocrat committee that was established, but this does not mean that this would lead to an agreement that would lead to a real impact. However, this does not equate to a zeroing out of the influence. This conclusion is further reinforced by discussion regarding the re-extension of the movement to build and to fill the vacuum that was established, and also to holding the militias accountable. And irrespective of this, irrespective of the fact that many groups were accused of looting and blocking roads, we note that this measure, despite the criticism it faced, was welcomed by a large segment of the population after months of the absence of order. And of course, we need to take into account that it should be noted that the balance of governance in the post-war period has become more complex, and the ability to maintain security alone will no longer be sufficient to restore a social mandate. And I would like to conclude by saying Hamas's future can be understood as a dilemma of choices that cannot be resolved through the binary of survival versus elimination, but rather through a redefinition of function as a resistance movement. It requires first and foremost internal reform that consolidates the center of decision-making and reinstitutionalization of relations among the movement's three arenas, as well as between the political and military spheres, and the renewal of popular legitimacy translated into tangible improvements in living conditions, and the consolidation of a regional network of reliance within manageable costs as a governing authority. However, the trajectory points towards removing Hamas from the formal facade of power while maintaining effective influence through the deep-rooted networks.
دكتور طارق.
Thank you, Dr. Tarek, for this intervention. Now we open the floor for your questions and answers. Please make your questions brief and pointed, and state to whom you are directing the question. We start Dr. Ahmad Azam.
في منصة.
There is a podium here to the left and one to the right with microphones on. My question relates to all the interventions. I start the question with why this obituary, this funeral procession in your papers. Mr. Hani, yes, I'm in solidarity with you, but I'm very upset. I'm insisting on life to be continued as much as we can until God determines what He wants. This is a funeral procession. We have to rethink these papers. Why do all your papers they are searching for solutions for those that these factions have caused this disaster for? They should look for solutions for the Palestinian people. I thank the organizers. I was moving from one hall to another, and I deliberately attended the papers of the young generation, young researchers. These are writings on the wall. You are searching for the birth of our people at the wrong place. the birth will come from a new womb. It is present here. It's in Lebanon. It's Palestine. So this is not an illusion. Why this funeral position? Give people hope. Give the young generation some hope. This kind of discourse should be done somewhere else. Why insisting on this obituary-like speeches? Please state your name and affiliation. Amjad Jibril. My question to Dr. Tarek: will any revision of Hamas lead to separating Gaza? I think Hamas has burdened Gaza with what they cannot bear. I'm not blaming Hamas. What I'm saying is Dr. Saleh al-Naami was talking about the leadership place for Gaza in the under Israeli occupation, and leave the West Bank where the potential is bigger, and focus on Gaza, which is much smaller. Unless the Egyptian position changes and we go beyond the Camp David Accords, there will be no solution for Gaza. Is what Israel doing now? Israel is playing a dangerous game. They may not be calculating the ramifications. Maybe it will turn against them. Personally, I expect something to happen in Egypt which turn all the equations upside down. Finally, I want someone to focus on the relations between the international and global aspects, the regional and the local. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, Khalid Faris. In Dr. Leila's intervention, she mentioned the one-state, the two-state solutions. There is an absence of the vast majority of the Palestinian people. It's easy in Palestinian discourse to ignore the Palestinian National Movement should represent the vast majority. We should be a bit more democratic. In any political vision, we have to place our position on the opinion of the majority of the people.
شكرا.
Thank you. My name is Abdullah Al-Mansouri. One observation to Dr. Hani. If you declare the death of the Palestinian cause, then you're announcing the obituary of the entire Arab nation. Everything that happened in Palestine in a negative sense reflected negatively on the entire Arab nation and vice versa. We can talk about some ramifications of the Al-Aqsa flood and turn it into an opportunity to develop our struggle. Think of the Palestinian cause as a cause for the Palestinian elite and the Palestinian people, despite the huge sacrifices made. When I speak about the Arab dimension, I'm not talking about the official state level, but the level of the people. We must develop this in parallel with developing the Palestinian aspect, that how could the Palestinian elite build a new, maybe a Palestinian movement, and link that to what we can achieve at the Arab nation level and the global level in view of all the gains we made in the aftermath of the Gaza war. Good evening. Mr. Abu Adnan Hani, when he talked about the death of the national movement, I think there are some justifications. The aggression on Gaza exposed the international order, the inability of the Palestinian and the Arab people now. Gaza is being restructured on a new colonial basis as if it's a property owned by the Americans and the Israelis, and at the same time they want to disarm Hamas and reform the PA. No mention of occupation, colonialism, settlement, occupation, right to self-determination. There is a deep structural crisis that the American national movement is going through. We have to understand. Secondly, we must build on the achievement in Dr. Azmi's opening lecture, talked about the difficult relationship between the armed struggle and the continued occupation. He talked about building the popular democratic dimension, which culminated in the Intifada and the unified leadership. Therefore, we have a legacy we can build on. We have a solidarity movement. We have a national narrative. We have the international resolutions. But Mr. Hani talked about the crisis, and he said we cannot build a new national movement unless we rely on the old one. About reformulating Hamas as a resistance movement. Do you mean resistance only as armed resistance, or resistance in its popular aspect, in a battle which is based on steadfastness and clinging to our land? Thank you. Please be brief. Thank you. Hammam from Al-Arabi TV. A question to Dr. Tarek regarding Hamas. And it will be impossible for Hamas to work as part of the governance. Now they want Hamas to disarm. If Hamas does not disarm, we will see a bloody scenario and the end of Hamas. if Hamas, on the other hand, gives up its weapons, what will be the future of the Palestinian people after years of Israeli bullying, excessiveness, and other issues? Can we expect a third intifada as a way out and turn this equation? And how can this be in an organized manner, or is it just an explosion as a result of pressure? I give the panelists now a chance to respond. We start with the last panelist, Dr. Tarek. Thank you to all of you. I want to say Mr. Abu Dhamir and talking about funerals and things. We are here meeting in a place which is based on an academic discussion, and we are not talking about political leaders. There was a lot of talk about the problems that we face, and we started again without revisiting and analyzing the previous things. The Palestinian National Movement has died a long time ago. We are in the situation now because the Palestinian National Movement was absent. They left Hamas on its own to fight and to take the decisions on its own, and the people of Gaza on their own. So the attempts we see is to restore a national movement and not a national movement. If there was a proper national movement, then, and Brother Abu Dhamir was part of a great initiative, and there are other initiatives. So therefore has more to do with being objective and reading the situation as it is, and not to push people to a state of hopelessness. This is the real job of academics and thinkers. As for Hamas revising its position, I don't think anybody in Hamas or outside it said that Gaza will to liberate Palestine. Liberating Palestine is linked to so many dimensions at the Palestinian level, regional level, and international level. Maybe there are some literature, but I don't think this is I am a researcher into Hamas. My source is Hamas's own documents, the Charter and the Declaration of Cairo and the document on the prisoners of war, which reflect Hamas's real positions. Everything else may reflect some opinion, but not a unified position of Hamas. Will a third intifada be the solution? I don't think so. I think it will exacerbate a situation that we are already experiencing. The solution is the real elections where all the Palestinians can take. We do not want to say that armed resistance is the solution or political negotiation is the solution. The political, the national movement should be formed as a result of election, and to open the door, to the PLO as the base for a Palestinian movement. Very quickly, the situation that took place in Gaza and the West Bank and the silence, I think, justifies this kind of talking about funerals. I do not like this kind of metaphoric expressions, but we are in a difficult situation nonetheless. I think even Mr. Hani spoke about an obituary. At the end of his intervention, he proposed some solutions. So he is not believing what he started by saying, and all the papers had some sort of initiatives. And the question about the third intifada, no, this is not our priority. We should have a new leadership, a new organization, elections, etc. On the 7th of October, we went into this war without being prepared for it. As for a regional chaos can turn against Israel, I can link this with what Abdullah al-Mansur is. It's not a question of guessing. Something happened in Israel we should build on if there is organized Palestinian work, and until we can crystallize a clearer Arab position which is more in line with the Palestinian right. I agree with Mr. Mohsen that we have a legacy that we can build on. Yes, you need to stand on firm ground if you want to come out of a crisis, and your history is part of this. Thank you. In addition to what Dr. Tarek has said about the funeral procession that our friend Ahmad Azam has talked about, I say we have to be frank and be scientific and be patriotic and work to achieve change. This is what I try to present. I did not provide an exit strategy for those who created this crisis. What I said, we should ignore them and bypass them and go forward, because there is a barrier which is oppressing any move aimed at change. There is a national movement which is in crisis. I did not talk about Palestinian cause. I said the Palestinian cause is alive and has the ability to live, and the Palestinian people would explode in revolutions. But why, after all the sacrifices, we have not achieved results compatible to the size of the sacrifices we had? Because we never had bold analysis. We have to admit, is there a small crisis within the Palestinian political system, or this is a hopeless case and we have to I did not talk about or did not call for revolutionary work or extremism, whatever. We want to build an alternative movement, otherwise the same entities will continue governing our destiny for God knows how long. Will a new intifada is to be expected soon? There are important personalities saying since 2015 that there is an intifada, imminent intifada. In reality, that's not true. The intifada has indications of its size, expectations, viability. We have waves, protest waves, and we should be prepared for the intifada when it comes. But an intifada armed with awareness, national program, a mandate, we do not want to do that for the sake of resistance or struggle. We want our people to be worthy of seeing results and achievements. Abu Adnan, I am Abu Adnan too. I presented some solutions. There were other suggestions I didn't have time to make, like we must revisit the formulation of the Palestinian National Charter in a way that protects national, historic, and legal, and legitimate rights of our people, and not a repetition of 64 or 68, but in a revised way based on the, of course, the historic narrative will not change, historical narrative will not change, but we have to reformulate it and work from the ground upwards. Otherwise, we have an ice cube's chance in hell of survival. I attended many conferences, and you know that, but we reached a dead end, continuing doing things which have been proven to have failed. Our situation is much worse than how it was. A large portion of the Palestinian leadership is adapting to the current situation, so they are far away from effecting any change. They only want to maintain their leadership position. They want to maintain their leadership and not the people, and this is very dangerous. And so the faction becomes the norm. Like the recognition of the PLO was the historical achievement. Israel did not recognize any Palestinian right, yet the Palestinian leadership thought that recognizing the PLO is the biggest achievement, and this was a huge mistake. The factions should understand that. Thank you, we're running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hani. Thank you, Dr. Leila. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you to my colleagues and my co-panelists. Abu Damir, I'm going to tell you that this is a funeral, and after each funeral there is something new. We have to face the reality that the National Palestinian Project has come to an end. We have achieved so many things up to now, and we have failed a great deal. So what are the achievements of the Palestinian cause? Our people are still there. The Palestinian cause is still alive, and the Palestinian people have played a very important role. So we have the international law that has define the right of the Palestinian people when it comes to self-determination. We have the recognition of the Palestinian state by 157 states. So the situation is known to so many people. There are so many important things that have been achieved, but the great failure. So Oslo was a problem, but the performance of the Palestinian leadership after Oslo and the splintering of the national unity is in keeping with what the doctor had said. This was the greatest problem, and this did not happen because there was somebody who was greedy or was lazy. There was a structural problem. We marginalized the PLO and the Palestinian representation, and perhaps save in this matter. I do not want to talk about this particular point, but what we have seen and what we have learned, our people are still alive, our cause is still alive. We have paid a dear price, and we need a new project. The project of the Palestinian state has proven our political presence and existence, but it cannot do more. And liberation can only happen through national unity, and national unity requires a popular representation. We talked about the majority of the Palestinians want a Palestinian state. This is not going to lead to anything else. When we talk about the Palestinian majority, if we talk about the people of Rafah or the West Bank, yes, they want a state. If you talk to Palestinians living in Lebanon or the US, they're going to talk about the right of return, but they're not going to talk about the Palestinian state. How can we win their votes? This can happen through democratic representation. This current leadership cannot achieve that. We tried as much as we can to revive it, and I do not think that this revival would be through what we worked on in the past. So it took us 18 years to have a new leadership, but the new leadership worked a great deal. And we have to start working. Yes, this is a moment of resoluteness. We have to be resolute on the ground, but if we do not have a liberation project to build on what preceded, we're going to be in a standstill. So the whole region is changing because the concept of the state and the authoritarian regime is not fading away. We have to work on different levels, internally, regionally, and also globally, but we're not going to reach a solution if we do not achieve national unity and a complete representation of the Palestinian people who decide what they want, and they can build on what we have achieved so far. On that basis, I talked about this project. We have to confront. We live in an appetite. We have been living in an appetite for 20 years, and we cannot. We achieved our political presence, but how can we carry out a liberation process to put an end to this racist rule? This is what we should think about seriously and not be limited only to the factions. There is new blood that should come to the surface. We need a new leadership, a new representation, and most importantly, we need to have serious dialogue, a real initiative to have a real and large Palestinian representation for the Palestinians to decide what they want. Thank you very much, Dr. Leila. This is a very thorny and lengthy topic, and I would like to reiterate my thanks to Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Tarek, Dr. Hani for their valuable interventions, and allow me in a few minutes to conclude and to thank many of those who contributed to the hosting of this forum. And I would like to start with the dear colleagues who participated in the evening sessions, the moderators of the different sessions, and I would like to extend my thanks to all the researchers.
And I would like to thank all the panelists and those who presented their papers. I would like to thank all our guests who came from outside Qatar, from Palestine, the Arab world, and elsewhere at their own expense. As you know, the forum is open for registration for the participation of presenters, media personnel, other contributors, and I would like to thank the participants from inside Qatar, and I would like to thank our colleagues who contributed to the organization, Majdi Al-Malki, Khalid Carlos Taha, May from the Palestine Research Center for the work throughout Masr. And I must also like to thank Dr. Azmi Bshara, the idea behind this forum, and his attention to every detail, and to his attention to all the research and the guests and the attendance and the importance of the Palestinian cause. And the Arab Center, of course, which has placed the Palestinian cause at the top of its research agenda, and we have organized many events, conferences, many books were published. And I would like to thank Ms. Mariam Hawari and her team, Ms. Dali, Yunis, and all the colleagues in the Hikama, Periodical, and the Center for Dr. Ghassan Kahlou, Dr. Madi, Ms. Mu'min Al-Ajad, Mr. Umar Abdin, and I would like to thank our colleagues, Nagam Al-Aqad, Mu'taz Al-Nadir, Umar Khalid, our colleagues also, who look after our website, Dr. Ahmad Hussein, Mr. Ibrahim Abdul Jawad, Mr. Faisal Sawli, Mr. Abdul Munham Shatur, Mr. Mahmoud Mtawa, and I would like to thank our colleagues, Dr. Imad Qaddura, Ms. Amal Fayash, Dr. Lina Khadar, Mr. Abdul Wahab Suwaisi, Mr. Muldi Abbasi, Mr. Nabil Hussein, and Ms. Abby Lewis, and I'd like to, and Mr. Suhail Jalawi, and Mr. Sultan Al-Rushdi for their efforts to organize trips and visas, etc. All our research teams,
وجه الشكر الكبير
and we thank our volunteers from the Doha Institute for their efforts throughout the forum, and I'd like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time and trouble and attending all the different sessions, and all our followers on the social media platforms, and we look forward to meeting you in future events. Thank you.